Right. Good evening. Oh gosh, I can't even remember what lesson this is now. It must be what, lesson 3? Is it? I'm not sure, to be honest. But anyway, we're going to be carrying on with what we were doing last week, with the addition of now using some inks. So some coloured inks. So the ones that I generally have here are the Winsor and Newton little bottles of inks like this. So it doesn't matter what sort they are. You know, if you've got some inks, you can use them for this activity. But on the other hand, you know, if you've only got watercolours, you could use watercolours or even acrylics. So it's absolutely fine. You don't need tons of different colours either, because we're going to limit the amount of colours we use tonight. But the idea of tonight was to extend the work we've done and look at atmospheric perspective as well, which we have covered once or twice before, but somebody mentioned it last week, that if I could talk about it a little bit. So it's the idea of obviously creating a sense of atmosphere, but a sense of space and distance within a landscape as well. So we will go back, I think, later to looking at foliage and all that sort of thing as one of the elements of landscape. But tonight I thought, yeah, okay, so someone's mentioned that, and we want to have a look at perhaps the mark making and creating that effect with colour as well. So we'll have a look at some of the stuff we've already talked about, and then I'll show you and talk to you a little bit about some of the other things as well. Okay, let's go over to the wall. Oh, right, okay. I've already put these on. I didn't want to do that. Right, so these are the things that we've been looking at last week, and I did a little demonstration of how to draw something freehand and how to measure it freehand, as opposed to using the grid that we normally use. So I was drawing this picture of Thwaite, or Thwaite, to say it with the accent. So the idea was that you draw a similar shape to the one that you've already got on the photo. So you can see the photo just below. And then we use key elements within the picture to help us measure out whereabouts that is placed within the composition of the photo in order to draw it. So on here, you can see a very, very basic drawing, and then we go in with a little bit more detail when we're happy with that composition, and then we start adding more intense detail. And then after that, of course, I started to use my new pen, which was the Sailor pen last week, because it could do lots of really cool and different sorts of marks and all that sort of thing. So we did that last week, and then I did this as a demonstration as well. If you remember, I took this barn, drew it out, and we used, some people were really pleased with how well it came out using, if you use a little bit of wax crayon, and then brush and ink to make those effects. And I'll show you that again in a few minutes as well. Let's just get rid of that. And so, yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about atmospheric perspective. So I've gathered a few sort of different artists for us to have a look at tonight, just to give you some ideas about what we're going to have a look at. I'm just going to find them now. Got so much stuff on here. Right, so so I've got some different paintings here from a few different artists. A couple maybe that you would remember, but atmospheric perspective, it's also called aerial perspective, or aerial painting sometimes. So it's a technique where we're trying to create this sense of illusion and depth within a landscape. So in other words, to make things feel farther away, or so the things that are further away, might feel lighter or less detailed or look that way. And then often things that are further away in a landscape might also have a bluish tint to them as well. So this happens because of the atmosphere, or the air and dust and moisture that's in the air, and that's in turn then scatters the light, making distant objects look hazy and less vibrant. compared to those that are closer to us. And you might notice some of that going on in a few of these pictures here. So a really well-known artist that I did show last time I talked about this was Leonardo da Vinci and his famous painting of Mona Lisa. So the background mountains were much more faded and bluish, and then the woman, Mona Lisa, was much more sharper in the foreground. So more up-to-date or more recent artists than that would be an artist which includes Georgia O'Keeffe. And she painted this one down at the bottom in the middle. So let me just see if I can just choose the right one here. There it is. Yep, it's that one. I'll just bring that to the front, and then I'll make it a bit bigger if I'm allowed. Okay, so here we go. Let's grab that one. So this one on here is called Sky Above Clouds from 1965. And she used this technique to create a sense of vast open spaces and the distant clouds and things. And it says mountains on here, but the light appears softer and lighter as you go back into the distance, and less detailed than the objects in the foreground. So this gives the viewer a strong sense of depth and immediate immensity of the landscapes. So yeah, I thought that was quite, I mean, it's quite a clear one to look at as far as atmospheric perspective goes, because you've got that really deep blue. And then as we go back, you can see how it sort of graduates and fades, or the graduation fades towards the back. But the other aspect of atmospheric perspective, or indeed just perspective, is the fact, obviously, that things are going to get smaller as they go towards the back. So your eye is kind of drawn to the foreground and then led through into the background. So it's one of the basic sort of ideas of that. So Georgia O'Keeffe, by using atmospheric perspective, made wide open desert landscapes. I think she lived in a really sort of dry desert landscape for quite some time, but she made them feel much more expansive. And then we've got, of course, David Hockney over here as well. So I'm just going to bring that one up. So you get it up there. So David Hockney, and some of you will know about David Hockney, of course, or a lot of you will. So David Hockney's a really famous artist from Yorkshire, and a number of years ago he came back to the UK after living in LA for many years, and he was just amazed at how beautiful everything was. So he'd kind of forgotten really what it was like in England, I guess. But he often uses atmospheric perspective in a unique and vibrant way in his landscape paintings, especially in his depictions of the Yorkshire countryside. So instead of sticking with traditional muted colours and hazy effects, he often uses exaggerated bold colours while still applying the principles of atmospheric perspective. So this is actually a painting. And it's quite interesting because I went to see these at the Royal Academy, and these paintings are all done on his iPad, which is quite famous for having done that. So he used all the different kinds of brushes you've got on an iPad with a certain piece of software to create this piece. But it's quite a nice one to choose because we've been doing all this mark making, and we've also been and we're also thinking now about atmospheric perspective. So we've got, you can see if I bring it in a bit closer, there's all these lovely lines and details that is used. But towards the front where the daffodils are, the colours are much more bold and clear, including that tree with the little horse sign on it. And then as you go back, things become much more paler and faded and things like that. So it's a really nice one to look at for our project that we're doing this evening as well. So I'll just pop that one back over there like that, and just get rid of that. So another one artist that we've got here is, let me just have a look. I've got that bit twice, so let me just scroll down. The next one I wanted to show you is the black and white one, just at the top in the middle, but I did want to just talk about the other two on there as well. But this black and white one is a really, really interesting one because it is absolutely gigantic. It is twice the size of a person standing in front of it, and it's by an artist called Tacita Dean. So this particular picture is let me see if I can find the title of it. There it is. Right, it's called The Dark Sublime. So again, we've got a really strong sense of atmosphere in this particular painting. Well, it's more of a drawing, really, I think. And other paintings by this artist are called In Chalk Fall. So it's very similar to this one. And Dean uses a variety of mark making techniques to capture the effect of depth and distance. So we probably can't see too much of that in this particular photograph, but there's lots of textured marks in the foreground and strong contrast and details in there as well, as the cliffs recede into the background. So again, we've got really dark areas in the foreground and a sense of the mountain going straight up there with those diagonal lines, and then we've got the faded and less detail towards the back on there as well. So if you've got a moment, it's worth doing a little bit of research and having a closer look at some of that stuff too. Now the other pictures that I've got here is this one. So I'm just going to bring that to the top because I want to enlarge that because I really like this one. So this one is by an artist called Karen Matheson Smith, and I really like this one because it does really show what we're talking about again here. So we've got the really bold, bright oranges in the foreground, and then as we go back through the landscape, you can see the midground actually is still quite intense, but as we go towards the back, you can see those pale pastel-y colours that really give this sense of space and distance. So there's obviously a lot of moisture in the air, perhaps salt because we're by the sea, which creates that sense of distance and space. So large marks in the foreground and smaller ones as you go back into the background just there as well. All right, so that's a really nice one. And then I found a traditional one as well. Hang on.
You've had a message from Nina in Atlanta.
Right, okay. Well, I'll do that in a minute then.
There you go. All right, yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Come on, Come on.
In full flow, and in comes Sophie again.
Well, Nina's messaging you.
Yeah, I know Nina's messaging me. Right. Okay. And then the last picture over there is let me just find that one. There. This one's by someone called Albert Bierstadt, and I really like this one because of the drama in there as well. So I'm just going to enlarge that one for you because it's very highly contrasty, and it's got really lovely light towards the back, but you can see how intense the marks are and the little deer are in the front there, and that really gives it a wonderful sense of space as well. Okay, so if anyone wants these pictures to have a closer look at later, I can forward you those so you can have a closer look. Okay, so I'm gonna just turn that one off, and then I'm just going to show you a couple of things now, which are going to help us understand it even more. So some of you might recognize this picture. It's called The Wanderer by Caspar David Friedrich, and it's from the Romantic period. And I've got the original. So this is actually a painting that has been made to show how atmospheric perspective works. So we've got, it's obviously a monocolor painting, it's just in blue, but we've got the really dark area with the figure, and then you can see the tones change as they go to the back. So if we put on the original picture, you can really sort of get a sense and an idea of how the artist has created that sense of space within the picture. Okay, so, and there was one more thing. I just wanted to put this one on as well, because this shows a tree, obviously, or trees on here as well, which does pretty much the same sort of thing. So tonight, what I thought we would do is use some inks to work on a picture, but use the inks to create this sense of space and distance that we've been talking about this evening, but then to apply some marks over the top. So my suggestion is that we use a single color of ink. So I've started with a blue, but you could quite easily start with a purple or something like that. Draw out your landscape, and then you start to apply all the other details and things that we've been learning the last few weeks back over the top. So we'll go over to the desktop now and have a quick look at what's going on here. So we've learned all these lovely mark making techniques. We've been exploring inks and pencil to do the same sort of thing. And last week, I was using the pen to apply these mark making techniques. And I did do a little bit of this atmospheric perspective, but I got carried away because I really wanted to do my pen. But in the foreground, we've got this lovely detail. And then as you move back into the background, I've just a bit reduced the intensity of the mark making around here as well. So we're starting to get this sense of distance and space. And then this one almost does it, but I didn't quite finish it off. And if you remember, we used some candle wax on here so that some of those areas could stay white. And then I did a wash of colour or ink over the top and then work back into it with the pen. So we're going to use these kinds of techniques, but hopefully build into that a little bit more. So up there on the top, that way, up there in the top corner of the page here, we've got this landscape, which is the one that I've started to work from this evening. I can do a little demo of a drawing demo of how to draw it out and things again freehand if you'd like me to, but I thought I always want to sort of get started a little bit earlier. So with this landscape, I'm going to try and use that idea of the gradients going through the landscape. So I'm going to use darker tones and more detail at the front, less details towards the back, and then keep it really light right at the back, whilst also using a little bit of the candle wax to keep some of these areas light even when I go quite dark. Okay, so here's the landscape that I've sketched out quickly before the beginning of the lesson today. So and I use the same sort of techniques as before, which is measuring out where the edge of the building comes to. So you can just about see I've worked out whereabouts the side of the building is there, and then that gives me the space to be able to put that in and so forth. So lots of comparative measuring, using the frame to help me to get everything in place and so forth, right? But I can do that again if you want me to in a bit. So I've started to add some details into this, including some candle wax and things. So there's my candle wax at the moment. I was looking for my wax crayons, but I couldn't find those. So I've just carried on with the candle wax, and just adding some little bits in there is really going to help to keep the highlights and things in the picture as we work on it. So just putting in a few highlights is going to help do that. Down here I've added some little bits of candle wax. I don't want it to be completely dark at the front, but I do want it to have a bit of texture as well. So as I mentioned a minute ago, I'm using this Winsor & Newton ink here. This one's got a bit messy because it's spilt, but should be okay. Okay, so I'll show you what I've done first of all. I'll zoom out slightly so you can see my bowl that I'm using. So I'm just using a bowl and some water, and then I put a bit of ink in here just like I did last week, water it right down, and then start to brush over the top like this. You can, like you might with watercolor, add some water onto the page first. That helps the color to spread a little bit more, but keep it really pale and work from the background to the foreground so that you can layer those colors on top of each other, or gradients on top of each other. And then I'm just going to make the ink slightly stronger for this hill in the background, just up there. So, and then brush in here. And this is all laying in a background that you can then work over with a brush to add some of those mark making techniques and things that we've been looking at. So I'm keeping the edges nice and soft as well. This is just normal cartridge paper that I've got on here. So watercolor paper is also nice to use, but I just thought I'd use it like this tonight. So I've gone slightly darker in this area, and then I'm going to put a bit more down here, and hopefully I can get this ink a little bit darker, because it was slightly diluted when it spilled. But keeping it light rather than too dark to begin with is important, because it will allow you to have a bit more flexibility in your approach going forward. Okay, and then I'm going to see if I can get a little bit more dark towards the front. And if it's not quite right, it doesn't matter too much, because I can adjust it as I go along. I just wanted to see how dark I can get it down here. And then I go slightly lighter in this wall at the back for now. And then I shall work back into it in a few minutes. And I'll probably use a different colour on top as well. So mix those colours up a little bit. This blue is not as dark as I wanted it to be, but it's okay. There we go. So the tree is kind of in the mid-ground. The mid-ground being in the centre. So I can do that reasonably dark so it comes forward a little bit as well. I'll probably have to let this one dry. Oh, I'll just take this. Excuse me. Oh, no, I didn't take it. Right, well. There we go. There we are. Okay, so I've not done that house just yet. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. I'm just going to go for the tree first. and then I think we'll get started. So I've laid in some tones to work into in a few moments when I get to it. And quite loosely as well. Okay, so, oh gosh, it's out of focus a little bit. There we go. There we are. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to get a smaller and thinner brush, and I'll be able to start working into some of those details. So, for example, if I'm going to work into the tree, I can start using some of the mark making back over the top. As I mentioned before, I might switch to a different colour so that I can make some of those things stand out a little bit more as well, and particularly because this blue is not going to be quite as dark as I'd like it to be. Okay, so using the inks then to create a sense of space by starting light at the back, getting slightly darker, and then really dark towards the front, and then we'll work into it with the mark making techniques. Okay? All right. So does that make sense to everybody?
So as you can see, we've got all the, as we mentioned before, we've got all the tonal bits and bobs in there ready to go. The foreground perhaps could have been a bit darker in this case, but you can see there's the difference between the two. And actually, once we start adding the marks and things into the foreground, we'll start to see a little bit more of that depth. But we may see that actually I add quite a bit of mark making into this, purely because it's useful to demonstrate how all of that works for a drawing like this. So as with the example up there on the top left hand side, you can see that there, here we go, there is less marks or lighter marks towards the background, which actually creates that sense of space and distance. Even if the hill towards the back of the picture is very light, very dark, you can still use a lighter tone in that area. Some people picked up photographs which had a lighter tone in the foreground and a darker one in the back, which obviously can be a bit confusing. But you can still work with that in order to, show that the hill is quite dark towards the back. But with atmospheric perspective, you're still going to get this kind of soft, hazy sort of effect in there as well. So I was just discussing a few of those photographs down there on the right hand side, and how there's atmospheric perspective in those. The reddish sort of orangey sort of one has a very, very strong sense of atmosphere in it, because obviously of the sense of light, and there's quite a lot of distance in there as well. So the further back it goes, the paler it's getting, and then we've got this stronger detail in the foreground. In fact, I would say that even on a picture that has a lighter foreground than perhaps the back, if you add more texture and detail into the front, which is much sharper, you can still create, you can still keep it tonally quite light, but with the mark making quite a little bit more heavy. And then certainly with a hill that's reasonably dark towards the back, you can add in tone, but you can do it in a way that is much sort of softer and not with too much detail. So not getting too attached to the background detail can be very important. The other thing you've got to remember if you're working from a photograph is that you as the artist are creating a new picture. You're creating something that represents what's there in front of you, but also has something of the artist, something of yourself in there. And you can break the rules in order to get the effect that you want as well. In fact, sometimes you need to exaggerate things in order to get this sense of space and atmosphere into the picture. So as you can see, I've started to work into that little barn and the one next to it already. I've added in a little bit of tone. I've changed the color because I'm going to use that color more in the foreground to sort of give us a little bit more of a clear distinction with all the mark making and things over the blue. As I mentioned, I might have mentioned earlier anyway, the blue, it was a dried out blue that I added a touch of water to get it going again. So it wasn't particularly strong anyway. So using a bit of purple over the top is harmonious with the blue. And it's warmer, of course, because it's got a bit of red in it. So it kind of pops out of the picture a little bit more too. So I'm going to continue working into this. You'll see me adding in more detail and stuff like that into the foreground. And then I'm going to move a little bit further into the back as well. Just over there, just above my head, actually, you can see where, and on the wall, you can see where some of the candle wax that I used earlier on has actually created a little bit of texture in the wall on there as well, and in the field towards the back. So it's worth considering doing that, because you can almost forget about it because you've got that mark in there, and the inks will not cover it because they resist being water-based and stuff like that. And a little bit, I'm doing this with the tree up here. With the tree, think of the tree as a sculptural object as well as something which is obviously very leafy and things, but have a look where the tone and shadow is. My first concern on that tree was to build up some leaves and things by using these little dashy marks, but then you'll see a bit later on I start to add more tone onto the right hand side in order to make it 3D. So the hill, ordinarily the hill in the background there is quite dark, isn't it, really? Some areas are dark anyway, and some areas are a little bit lighter. So over the top of this, without exaggerating too much, I've added in some pale, very watered down green onto the top to suggest some of the marks in the background. And I think there may have been a little bit of wax in the hill as well. But these are just little splodges that I've added in. And now you can see I'm just bringing forward, just made the front there a little bit darker on this little study. And I'm just adding some shadows to the stones in the wall as well. And just a little bit more detail on the midground, some on the sky as well. So I really enjoy doing this sort of thing because you can just play around with the materials, but particularly you can enjoy the mark making. So for a sort of 1.5 to 2 hour sort of drawing, it's a lot of fun. Seem to have got a bit stuck there. So again, slightly more detail down towards the bottom. And here you can just about make out me adding in. I'm not sure what's going on with the camera there. You can see me just adding in a little bit more shadow on that right hand side of the tree. I think I actually carried on a little bit longer after, just for a few minutes after the class on this one. So I've added some larger sort of splodges towards the front. I'm calling them splodges. Don't know what you call them. So the larger and slightly darker marks in the foreground there to bring things, you know, darker tonally, bring things forward a little bit as well. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and we'll have a little go with some inks yourself, and I'll catch up with you in the next lesson. Cheerio!